Hello.
So, Graham, talking of influential, brings us to perhaps our first topic of the evening. Your very, very good friend, Ai Wei Wei, who, of course, you've become a lifelong friend of
Yeah,
from
yeah.
your
Close buddy,
brief
yeah.
time of speaking with him in Cambridge, of course.
Oh,
Now,
yeah, well, I
subsequent to
met him
that, you've
at
not been.
Kettle's Yard Art Gallery in Cambridge exactly a
You
year ago.
did. So now that's
So,
prompted you. I mean, he didn't snub you, did he? He did actually, briefly say whatever, but it didn't stop you from therefore wanting to read his new
yeah,
memoir or newish memoir.
I got I got like 3 or 4 word answers out of him. It's a bit like I was
Yeah.
cross-examining him as a member of the Chinese.
He has had a lot of those interrogations in his time, and maybe your manner just was reminiscent of the authorities, and so you got the briefest of answers. You got the no from Wei Wei. So Graham, this newish memoir from Wei Wei, what's the situation with this? Is this been serialized over here? Have you found an exclusive copy somewhere, or is it just on general release?
Yeah, wait, give it to me personally. No, no, it's on a big publisher. Obviously, it's published by Bodley Head, which is an imprint of Vintage, which is part of surprise, surprise, Penguin Random House, which is owned by Asda's, which is owned by Amazon, which is owned by the Chinese government, probably. I don't know. It's all a bit complicated these days.
So you managed to get access to it. What's it called?
It came out. It's called A Thousand Years of Joys and Sorrows, which is from a poem by his dad, because his dad was a very famous poet in China.
A dissident
Also, a
poet,
very,
then.
very early member.
Mm,
Yeah, he was a very early member of the Communist Party in China,
mm,
1920s. So
mm,
he was in the thick of it in the days that really mattered and led to where we are now, all these years later. And
mm.
he was close friends with, if I can pronounce it badly, Zhou Enlai, who was like second in command in the Communist Party to Mao Zedong. And he also knew Mao
Gosh,
Zedong quite well, but it
yeah.
didn't stop his dad from being banished twice
No,
by the
exactly,
communists. And when
exactly.
you're banished by the communists, you have quite a hard time. So at one point, the second time he was banished for no particularly good reason, but you got to remember this is a dictatorship, so reasons aren't really not necessary. He was living in a hole in the ground with the very young Wei Wei. So, so the book's really about his dad and how it led to who Wei Wei is now.
Mm.
The reason it's a great book, and I think I'm about page 100 now, is that it's a real great potted history of China and its politics over the last 100 years, but totally told from a personal, real point of view rather than sort of like historical analysis and guesswork. It's
Mm.
all real, and it's quite a gripping read as well as being quite enlightening.
Do you know, Graham, if this book's been made available in China, as well as obviously to the Western audience that now um, laps up anything that Wei Wei does artistically? Um, is this seen as something that is going to be troublesome for him, ever trying to get back into China again?
Well, I think the thing comes across in the book quite early on is that a lot of Wei Wei's attitude towards things is based on how he was treating what his father thought. So he's into challenging the authorities, not in a reckless, stupid fashion, but he's not been a man from the beginning who was there to play
No.
the game. But he also knows how dangerous the situation is. So he's determined and he's brave, but he's not a stupid man. He's very
No,
intelligent.
no.
So he tries to avoid unnecessary battles and he tries to not get in trouble. But obviously, with a state like China, that's almost impossible, as his dad found out, and now as Wei Wei himself has found out. So
Mm.
there's no way this book would be published in China,
No.
and there's no
No.
way Wei Wei would be thinking about going back to China.
No.
You got to remember that when China was briefly flavor of the moment in the West, and because it had become a capitalist country, was looked on as a country that might eventually develop into some sort of democracy in the
Mm.
noughties, when it was sort of like okay to be pro-Chinese. Well, I think there was a history of Mao was released in the early noughties
Yeah.
from the writer of a book called Wild Swan, which is quite a
Mm.
hit in the West.
Oh yeah. Oh
And
yes.
it's a
Yes.
great
Yes.
book. And it's all
Mm.
about Mao and how, even to this day, Mao killed as many people as Stalin. and he was a
Mm.
terrible, terrible man. And even to this day, you're not allowed to say that in China. So,
No, no,
since this book tells you the inside story of what it was like to be in the early years of communism right through the current day, there's no way this
mm,
was published in China.
no, no way. Absolutely not.
But it's quite interesting because it ties in with Russian communism. There's a lot of similarities and crossovers between how the Russian state, once it became
Mm,
communist, behaved and the Chinese state. There's a lot of similarities between the
mm,
two. But I think it's probably a case of dictatorships all tend to behave in the same way, so they all tend to do the
absolutely.
same thing.
Does he offer any alternative way that China could be? Does he offer, if you like, an artistic thought on
No,
that?
no, he's no, he believes in keeping going. He believes in keeping trying to do the right thing. He believes there'll always be voices who want to do the right thing, but he's
Mm,
not naive. He doesn't think China's
no,
suddenly going to become a different country. Almost, it's a bit like Russia. Who in Russia really believes that Russia's ever going to change? Who in China,
exactly,
even if they do want it to change,
exactly.
and that's not a given because you got to remember most people in China don't
Mm,
get any real news whatsoever, and
no, no.
most of them probably have very good lives. So
Yeah,
he's got no
yeah,
illusion that it's still going to change, but he's not going to give up
no,
either.
no, no.
And it's a very good
So
book so
Graham,
far. I'm really enjoying it.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's Wei Wei's new book, which, if you're in China, regular Chinese listeners, which I can't imagine um, we have regular Chinese listeners, Graham, but you never know. So anyway, that's for their benefit. Now, you, while you've been in the Lake District, have bumped into, well, one of the great classical pianists, Martin Roscoe, who regularly has been reviewed by my colleague Martin Dreyer in the pages of the York Press with utter enthusiasm for Martin's work. And lo and behold, Graham, that is a gentleman who saw the need to ask you for some advice at a recital. Now, you might need to
Yeah, yeah.
explain how on
Well,
earth that could happen.
the whole thing is about a fire sleep. So there's a piano recital on a Saturday night inside John Ruskin's drawing room in the main
Yes,
window looking lake. And it
wonderful.
holds about 30 people because it's a tiny little room and it's
Yeah,
part of the museum. Well,
yeah,
it's literally like, as I've said already, like if you punch your hand through the wall,
yeah.
you're in John Ruskin's house.
Mm,
There's no way I couldn't go and see Martin Roscoe
no,
on his own
no,
giving a piano recital in a small room, which is where
no.
John Ruskin lived. It had to
Mm,
be done, and he was playing
exactly.
a Haydn sonata and a Schubert impromptus and Brahms third intermezzo opera and
Mm.
not opera opus and Beethoven sonata in A flat. And these were all pieces I didn't know because in my mind, as a fan who likes rock and roll and lots of other things, there's just
Yes,
not enough time for me to really get
no.
into classical music. And the only classical composer I actually know really well is Mahler, and
Mm.
that's
Mahler,
it.
yeah.
So, but how can
Mm.
you avoid? How can you not go to see it? It's literally next
I, I,
door.
I,
It's a
I,
tiny little room.
Graham, if I'd been there, I'd have punched a hole in the wall to make sure I'd got there. Absolutely.
Well, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I was so close to Martin when he was playing piano that if I'd fallen over forwards, I would have hit him. So you're seeing him like bashing away at the keyboards with
Yeah,
completely amazing dexterity
exactly. Exactly.
and
Yes.
speed and talent and
Mm.
feeling and soul, and he was just
Mm.
gobsmackingly brilliant. But there was an interval, and there
Ah.
was mingling, and there was nowhere for him to run. So he was in the mingling, in the interval,
Mm.
walking around Johnson's house in these very
Mm.
small rooms. So I thought, well, wait a minute, I'm sure I've written about Martin a lot of times. And I'm sure I have. In the Harrogate
Mm.
Advertiser, I must have written his name as part of
Yes.
previews
Yeah.
probably
Exactly.
30, 40 times over the last 25 years
Yeah. I mean, not just. I
and
mean, he's
placed
played
his
the
little
festival.
mugshot picture.
Yeah. I mean, he's played
Yeah.
the festival, but he's also
So it's
been.
like
He's
almost
been
like
sort of concert soloist when they needed a concert soloist. Outstanding pianist on demand.
well, yeah,
Martin's your man. Mm. Mm.
this is a man who's been in more than 600 radio broadcasts of
Exactly.
concerts. He's been on radio
Yeah.
more than any other pianist in the world. He's been in the
Mm.
BBC proms 7 times. The guy's an absolute
Mm.
legend, and he's a proper northerner. He splits his time between the Highlands and the Lake District anyway. So I thought, well,
Yeah.
I've written about him so many times, it'd be really weird not to introduce myself. And in my head,
Yeah.
I thought I'd actually interviewed him on the phone at least once. So,
Yes.
so I sidled up to him in one of John Ruskin's rooms. I said, "Hello, Martin. That was tremendous. I'm Graham Chalmers, the Harrogate Advertiser." And he went, "Hmm."
Mm.
And I said, "Yeah, I've written about you so many times that I thought I should say hello. And he said, the Harrogate Advertiser. And I went, oh, yes, yes, the Harrogate Advertiser. And he said, Graham. I said, yes, yes, Chalmers. Graham Chalmers. So he got off to a slightly dodgy start. And then, because he was definitely not chatty, and he obviously thought, who's this Chalmers and who's this Harrogate Advertiser? He filled the little gap there. I mean, I was only slightly embarrassed because on the scale of embarrassment, this was only slightly embarrassing. I've been in much more embarrassing situations where I've much more embarrassing
and we've
stuff.
charted them regularly on this podcast.
This was absolutely nothing, but he must have felt slightly embarrassed. So he filled the space by saying, you don't think I'm playing too loud, do you? and then he started talking about the structure of the piano. So obviously I was sort of like listening intently and trying to look like someone who knew how pianos were constructed, which obviously I don't. And once he finished that bit, I said, look, these things are meant to be played with force. Keep going, keep doing it the way you're doing it. It's fantastic.
So do you think, Graham, you gave the right answer?
Yeah, obviously, yeah. But why would Martin Roscoe ask me if he's playing the piano too loudly?
Because you are Graham Chalmers and he did check it out. Chalmers, yes.
That's
Harrogate
right,
Advertiser,
yes, Chalmers.
and that's it. Out of everyone who's ever written about him, he needed your advice right then on whether he was playing too loud.
He asked me, I didn't ask him. And the funny thing was that after the interval, in the second half, now the second half, the pieces were quieter pieces, Brahms and Beethoven. But I think he played more quietly. I think he didn't play as much force in the second half.
So he basically, that suggested that he was playing right volume for the earlier pieces, but needed to tone it down a little. So he did actually take your advice. So that, Graham, is another one to notch up. The day that Martin Roscoe, probably the most regularly performing classical pianist in this country, has sought the advice of Graham Chalmers of the Harrogate Advertiser, and it swung. The influence on the concert was huge, and it changed the second half into being a quieter show. That's remarkable, Graham. One for the diary again.
When you open your mouth, it's quite dangerous, Charles, as you know. But you get results. Now the results aren't always good, but something always happens. So it's worth it.
I think it is. I think it is always worth the risk of it going wrong, because on the greater occasions it goes right and it leads to a story. And if you can't, they're in a situation where you're that close to him anyway, and you see him, you're quite right to introduce yourself. I've charted before my unfortunate run-in with Dylan Moran, which I regret, obviously, but I misjudged doing the same thing of saying hello. But that can happen. But overall, I think largely no harm in doing it, and this shows why. So there we go, Graham. And the height of the fantastic trip to the Lake District, John Ruskin territory, Martin Roscoe. So what a lovely time in the Lake District. Now, Graham, I do feel it's time for an interruption, if you would.
Yeah, well, bizarrely, I didn't realise this was the case, but for the King's coronation in May, Charles actually getting the crown on his head. There's actually an official coronation Spotify list, which I think I think the palace is involved with. I mean, why on earth would you want a coronation, Spotify list? I'm pretty sure that Elizabeth II didn't have that, or Elizabeth I, or Queen Victoria. Like, for goodness sake, get me a playlist for the coronation. I'm pretty sure that's not the usual thing, but then they've done one. And the interesting thing is that the number one track is The Beatles Come Together.
Is that? Can you give us some more flavours, Graham? Any others that?
Well, now the interesting thing about this is that there are other songs like Coldplay's A Sky Full of Stars, Harry Styles, Treat People with Kindness, ELO's Mr. Blue Sky. And it's all pretty predictable stuff, really. But The Beatles Come Together is quite a controversial song in a non-controversial way, because it was written by John Lennon when Timothy Leary, the man whose support of LSD and anti-war statements were so strong that the American government actually jailed him in the 1960s. So for a time, Timothy Leary was going to run for governor of California. I think Reagan won eventually. And Timothy Leary never really ran because he was on the run from the FBI. So John Lennon wrote Come Together originally for Timothy Leary to run as governor of California. And obviously so then rewrote it for the Beatles' Abbey Road album. But the interesting thing is that Timothy Leary also came up with Tune In, Turn On, Tune In, Drop Out, which Lennon used in Tomorrow. It was again a great LSD song. So I'm not sure that
yeah.
Charles is into LSD, although he did like the Beatles as a young man. As a young man, Charles did
Yeah.
like the Beatles and Jones, big fan of both. But also another thing about quite a lot of sexual imagery in a sort of surreal fashion. There's a few lusty moans to it. So again, this is not really Coronation material.
Graham, even the title might be seen as sexual, and to put it mildly.
Exactly, yeah. And finally, the last link of Come Together is actually to the Mafia in New York, because Come Together, it's riffs and styles based on Chuck Berry song, although it's not exactly the same, but it's sort of based. Morris Levy, the heavy from New York, who was connected to the Mafia, he had bought Chuck Berry's publishing rights. So when he heard Come Together, he threatened to sue Lennon and the Beatles over the song. So in return, Lennon said, "Okay, I'll record some Chuck Berry songs, which you'll get the money for," which is how you got John Lennon's 1975 album Rock and Roll. So it's got quite a strange heritage as the song that King Charles will have to his Coronation Spotify playlist.
Do we know where this playlist is being played on Spotify? Obviously, it's being played on Spotify, but when and
you're
how?
asking the wrong person here. Since when was I one to use Spotify? Obviously, I've got friends who use Spotify.
Well, I'm much the same. I'm just wondering.
Some of my closest friends are Spotify fans.
Is it if you're holding a party?
Yeah.
The
Beatles come together. The Beatles
come together. If you're holding a party and you need a playlist, this is it. Is that what they're saying?
Yeah, basically, yeah. You're supposed to play it.
So if you want to show no imagination and use a Spotify playlist put together for the Coronation, this is the one.
Yeah, well, people love playlists, but they don't have to make them now because you got algorithms to make it for you. But Come Together's been streamed 582 million times. But I will never add to that tally because I refuse to get involved with streaming because I still buy albums in physical form. So don't ask me about Spotify.
No, I don't, and I know you won't be playing that playlist, and nor will I, frankly. But it's interesting that it's been seen. It's been seen fit to draw one up, and with inevitable names on it. Just as you say, a surprising choice of Beatles track. But then at least it's not the millionth time for Hey Jude, so that's a relief, isn't it?
Well, yeah, entirely, because Hey Jude was great when the Beatles played it. It's not quite so good when Paul McCartney plays it.
It's just been played too much, played to death, basically.
No.
No, you'd still keep playing it. You've not had enough of Hey Jude.
I would invite to be played by someone not Paul McCartney. I think someone else could do a better version these days.
Oh, Graham.
Which gets you into U2, surely. Cover versions of their own songs.
Now, this is interesting. Now, is this self-indulgence? Is this a band running out of ideas? Is this, as it is put forward as, lockdown being put to good use by the Edge? This is the SOS, Save Our Souls, Save Our Souls, Songs of Surrender album. So you can get a short version with 16 reactivated U2 tracks, or you can get the full-blown, takes more than 3 hours to play them all, 40 tracks.
Oh my good God.
Now, I think that potentially these are interesting exercises to do, but I've yet to hear the one track, let alone 40 tracks, but I have read a cross-section of reviews, none of which are particularly enthusiastic for this project. It partly came about.
U2 aren't cool anymore. U2's completely uncool. Critics have gone pretty much off U2 over the last 10 years.
Yes, Songs of Experience and Songs of Innocence, neither well reviewed, enthusiastically reviewed. That's true. But I'm looking at it. Just got me thinking about bands that have done this before in some form. This is probably the most comprehensive it's been done. Now, Taylor Swift has re-recorded her albums because of the usual problem of record companies possessing the songs, and she's decided to therefore revisit all the songs. But it's not that far into her life that she's done that. Squeeze did it for exactly the same reasons. They no longer had the rights to their songs, so they basically re-recorded them note for note and challenged you to spot the difference. The Cure have done Mixed Up and Torn Down, those two albums.
That was a long time ago, though.
Yeah, and they also did the album where they re-recorded all the tracks with a very similar style, And they only all the hits were redone, but they left pictures of you they left off there for some reason. The ones that were potentially more interesting, Echo and the Bunnymen have done The Stars, The Oceans and the Moon, which was the orchestral versions of their greatest songs, and that was May 2018. And the one that's coming up that I am interested to listen to when it comes through, coming out in time, I think, to play, well, the York Barbican, they're playing James. They're playing York Barbican on April the 28th. And this is the 40 Years Orchestrated album, Be Opened by the Wonderful, in which they're revisiting 22 of their songs with an
Sounds
orchestra.
A terrible idea.
Well, let's wait and see, because I have reviewed tickets for that gig, and I'm interested to see them doing that. And we know that, I mean, Echo and the Bunnymen have announced 4 dates later this year, going and playing with an orchestra again. Now, so U2, however, maybe, although it's largely had negative reviews, this project is involved, we're talking a long career span, so it does go all the way back to the first album. Sadly, it ignores the second album, which I think would have been interesting to revisit the songs of. And it revisits songs all the way up to Songs of Innocence, Songs of Experience, and it obviously has a higher opinion of Songs of Innocence than most of us do, because there's several songs that have been revisited. What it's opened up the opportunities to do, Bono has rewritten lyrics. Most noticeably, Bad has gone from being a U song to an I song. I mean, it's a song about drums.
It's gone from bad to good. It's now called good.
Well, or bad to worse, Graham, apparently.
Yeah, it's called worse,
according to most reviews.
Yeah. Well, I've actually heard 7 tracks, Charles. I've actually heard some of the tracks, and I have to report.
Now, the key thing is, how does he sound? Tell me why it's not good.
Well, it's got some good elements. It's quite a bold thing to do. It's quite brave, but indulgent. And of course, you could actually define U2's whole career as brave but indulgent. But the problem is that the instrumental part of it, i.e. the backing, is really interesting, because you got Edge playing sort of like really spiky guitar sparingly. You've got like either spectral keyboards or you've got ambient washes. So if you ignore Bono's
which he's done
vocals,
as well, hasn't he?
If you ignore Bono's vocals and the lyrics, the background is full of atmosphere, and it sort of it could work. It could work. The problem is the songs and Bono's voice. What this album reveals, from the 7 tracks I've heard, is that a lot of the charm and power and excitement and likability of U2 songs is the energy. Is the complexity of the musical arrangement, not the song itself. And it's the bluster and barney of Bono belting it out full emotion. When he tries to rein it in, when you haven't got the bluster and the barney, when he's trying to be quiet and sensitive with no great backing, only that sort of like spectral background or ambient wash background, when you haven't got things going on all the time in the instrumentation, when you haven't got Adam and Larry and the Edge all bashing away at various instruments and making a big maelstrom of noise, it's the songs sort of start to crumble, and you realize how simplistic the actual melodies are. The lyrics are interesting. Bono, when he's going for it, is an interesting chap, but they're actually quite simplistic songs as melody structures. So all you've got is the melody and him trying to rein his natural emotions in. And the 7 tracks I've heard, it just doesn't work.
So if they're looking to bring something new to it, which stripping back is a familiar format, bands will do that little patch and shows, including U2, and the Rolling Stones do it as well, where they go and play, they sort of step out and they play an acoustic section of a show. We've had MTV Unplugged shows. In the case of Nirvana, I think one of their great recordings was that. And it did sometimes bring something more to the songs, but maybe over 40 songs, simply too much, and maybe the limitations in Bono's voice.
It's not that they've been too ambitious. They've been too ambitious. I saw them in 1987 do the acoustic set on the Joshua Tree tour at Murrayfield Stadium in Edinburgh, and they picked 3 or 4 songs that suited acoustic guitars, and it was all jollied up, and it worked as acoustic guitar versions. Briefly, you wouldn't want a whole unplugged gig, but it was a nice little interlude. But what they've done here is they haven't just done acoustic versions of their own songs like everybody else usually does. it's almost
Yeah.
like the song's either trying to be Chris Isaak crossed with Velvet Underground, which is an interesting concept, but it doesn't work, or they're trying to be Brian Eno does an ambient, music for airports with Bono warbling on
Yes.
top in a quiet fashion, and again, it doesn't work.
Mm.
So it's like if you took Bono's voice off, you'd say these are interesting background, atmospheric
Mm.
backgrounds. This could work, but Bono isn't the right man. Ironically,
No.
Bono is not the right man to sing his own songs in that musical context.
There's, I think, as I understand it, that the Edge has done some vocals. Notably, he's done an a cappella version. Not a cappella. Sorry, he's done a high voiced. I don't think to the extent of being a countertenor, but he's done a high vocal for the version of Desire. Have you heard that one yet?
No, no, but just the way you described it, I'm not
You're
rushing
not
to play it.
enthusiastic, are you? Yeah.
Well, I actually like U2, and there's an awful lot of U2 albums I like, and I can see
Mm.
their pitfalls, when they're not their best, I don't like them that much. But they've done a hell of a lot of great tracks, and they can be an
Absolutely.
amazing, amazing live band.
Mm.
And I love
Mm.
U2, Zeropa, the album after
Mm.
Acting Baby, the really European one. What was that called again? It had
Yes.
Lemon on it,
Is
stuff
that
like that. And but
pop?
that
Pop?
Johnny Cash the Wonder
Zeropa
is the
to
last
pop?
track in it. No,
Yeah.
Pop was the album after
Mm.
that. It was the one between.
Mm.
Uh, it's about Europe. I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, it's a great album. It's a great album
Not
because
as,
of the sound in the
mm.
music. If you were to do an acoustic version of that album, it would be very good. And I think most U2 songs don't suit a stripped back version, especially when
No.
they're trying to be in something interesting involving
Mm.
Chris Isaak and Velvet Underground and Brian Eno. It's just an ambitious idea that doesn't quite come off.
I mean, in terms of being ambitious, that's a good thing after all this
Hmm.
time. Must be.
Yeah, yeah, but well, U2 have now been scared to look like fools.
No, no.
But of course,
Particularly Bono, who
yeah,
makes a joke about that,
yeah, but
about himself.
occasionally they are just fools. Occasionally that braveness
Mm,
doesn't work,
mm, mm.
which makes an
It,
interesting band. But I'm longing for a good U2 album
so
again. It'd be great to have a great
for
U2.
that's largely been the reaction is can we have a new U2 album of original songs, maybe trying to take that in a new direction would have been a more interesting experiment. In terms of them revisiting their songs, what might have worked where it hasn't worked? Or was it just not a project worth doing?
I think the two things that would have worked were the jollier songs. If you'd done the jollier songs in a jolly fashion, just your usual
Mm,
conventional stripped back acoustic versions, some of
yeah.
those songs would work as jolly acoustic versions. But they
Mm,
haven't done that. It's quite a dark album. They're trying to be
yeah.
mature. They're trying to look back at their youth. They're trying to like reinterpret their youth for older people, which is what they are. But that doesn't
Mm,
make it work. It means it's an interesting premise. It's definitely an interesting premise. But does it work? I mean, maybe in 40 years' time or 50 years' time, when this podcast is finished, unless it's American music critics or the one music critic is left as Mojo reaches a thousandth edition, still writing about the Beatles and Stones.
hasn't lost its
Maybe that
mojo.
critic, yeah, yeah, maybe the critic will look back and say, actually, this Songs as a Referendum is actually really good. Who knows? It's definitely possible because it's a brave, interesting album. But I think what would have worked if they're going to try the Velvet Underground Chris Isaak approach, I think Bono had to drain his vocals and emotion completely and be
Mm,
totally monotone, and he can't do it. He's like you can tell he's fighting against his natural instinct, which is to like
yeah.
emote. He wants to emote, and he's trying not to emote because he's trying to make it interesting, and they're trying to be Velvet Underground. And but if you listen to Velvet Underground's third album, Jesus, which is
Mm,
basically one guitar or two guitars acoustic with Lou Reed singing on top of it,
mm,
this is what U2 would love to do. They'd love to do Jesus off Pilgrim's third album, but they just
yeah.
can't do it because it's not them. It just isn't them.
Well, ambition, and sometimes ambition, of course, leads to a fall, and maybe that's what's happened here. But surely you two don't show any signs of retiring. And once Larry gets through his injuries and gets back to being able to play again, they are going to be playing, of course, some dates without Larry. That's already been confirmed, hasn't it? Playing in
Mm.
America, I think, without Larry, with a deputy drummer. But once he's through that, then maybe get back into the studio for some new songs And maybe actually some things that have come from this will then inform the new way that they record the next album. Maybe there are things that they've experimented with that they have liked, or that they've learnt from, and they will reflect on what has and what hasn't been picked up well by
I
the
think
listeners.
that U2 could do a dark, spiky Velvet Underground type album
Mm,
if
mm,
Bono was allowed to go for it vocally and not be restrained. But
yeah.
I don't think they'll do that. I don't think there's any chance they'll do anything as edgy as that. Not to use a pun, obviously. I don't think they'll be
No.
as edgy as that because they like to be populist. They like to be successful. This is a band that self-consciously want to be big from the very beginning. So
Well, they
even though
set
I
out
think
to be
they
the
could do
biggest
something
band
like
in the
that,
world and became the biggest band in the world.
yeah.
Were
So they're
that
not going to
determined,
do
that
it, but
ruthless to do it. Mm.
they have. If they're going to be Velvet Underground, they have to be quite extreme and noisy and with a lot of emotion.
I mean, we've seen people buying in vast numbers the Beatles albums where the alternative versions of their great songs, or earlier versions, whatever, are put there for us to listen to. So there has been an interest in doing that, and of course that's the greatest band of all time that has done that. Would there have been some merit in U2 actually bringing out different versions of songs from the time that they made them, or would that be just totally self-indulgent? Whereas with the Beatles, even the Beatles are on a different level to U2.
Well, yeah, Beatles are a different level. There's no other band on the planet can release outtakes from studio sessions like the Beatles and still sell lots of
No,
records and still be interesting.
no,
Just because it's not that those outtakes are better than the released versions, the official
no.
versions. There's virtually none of them are. In fact, virtually none of them are as good as the eventually released versions.
Mm,
But the Beatles themselves are so interesting as musicians and personalities
mm,
that it's still interesting to listen to the sort of like slightly inferior versions that they, you know, did early on in their sessions for each album.
yeah,
Whereas with U2 or even the Rolling Stones or Blur, can you imagine a Blur outtakes? You can imagine a 4 CD
no,
Blur studio outtakes of early takes
no.
of finished
Blur,
songs. Oh, good
blurred,
God.
even more
You have
blurred,
to be, yeah.
no,
So U2 that wouldn't have worked for U2 either. I think
no.
U2 have a future, but only if they U2's, if you read their history, seem to struggle with working out what they're actually good at. And lots of producers
Yeah,
have said that about them, that they take forever in
yeah.
the studio because they can't work out what the best version is. So
Mm.
U2's perennial problem is not being able to decide what to do.
Well, we do await with interest where they go next with this. I still think, yes, it's been seen as self-indulgent. I think it was worth them looking back, trying. I think this is an approach that not many bands have done in the way that we've described them. They've done them more obviously just by doing very stripped back versions, or doing string versions, or doing note for note pretty much facsimiles of the original recordings. This at least has tried to do different territory. If it hasn't worked out, I think there's always a risk of that, but I still overall would champion the fact that they've it's not self-indulgent results, possibly maybe because they've done 40, but I think in principle it is interesting enough for a band on their scale to reconsider their past and to look at the lyrics from their past and reactivate those in different ways. So I'm speaking as someone who's yet to actually hear any of the evidence as to quite what it's like, and you've listened to
Yeah,
7 songs, and
you're like the lawyer for the defense who hasn't read any of the briefs.
well, there we go. Now, Graham, we're into 3 minutes left, but within that time, there is some more good news on the battle to save Edinburgh Filmhouse. So,
Oh yeah,
over
yeah.
to you,
Just
Graham, on that, please.
the last episode of this fantastic podcast, we did say that we thought that there was a movement now to save the Filmhouse, which is the
Yes.
base of the National Film Festival. And it's also one of
Mm,
Britain's greatest art house cinema since it was built in 1979. So
exactly.
many films,
Exactly.
so many great events, so many
Mm,
trailblazing film events
mm,
there, and also very
mm.
relaxed, informal, and a great place to sit and have a coffee or a beer. It's an amazing
Yep.
place in
Yep.
Edinburgh.
And
So
for you to say hello to famous directors. Exactly. Yeah.
and yourself. But
Mm,
we did say that there was movement towards saving it now. But remember, we
mm.
said last time it would require the Scottish government or someone official get involved for it to actually work.
Yes.
So what happened last week is
Mm.
two things. First of all, the SNP, which of course runs
Yep.
Scotland, has said it wants
It
to save
does.
the
Yeah.
films. And
Mm,
secondly, Edinburgh City Council, which obviously is quite important to this Edinburgh cinema, has also said
mm,
it wants to
mm.
save the Filmhouse as a cinema. So although it's not been
Good.
saved yet, they're two huge steps forward, and it gives you hope that the Filmhouse may be retained as a cinema, and it won't be turned into either a bar, which tends to happen these days, or apartments, which also tends to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's see where that goes. I mean, the SNP, of course, the results come through today. A new leader of that party, so maybe new momentum will come into that as well, because obviously they've got to look to the future and post Nicola. And so let's see where that goes. But it's also encouraging, as you say, really encouraging, Graham, actually, that the council is looking into it as well. And that's the kind of thing that you need. You need government support and you need council support, and that stands really therefore a very, very good chance of being saved, which I think ideally, let's hope that that can happen, because it's a piece of film history in its living history is the Edinburgh Filmhouse, and for it to go would be very, very sad, and just basically just wrong for it to go. There are things that should be surviving,
It'd be like
and
it'd be like shutting down the Barbican in London. You know, you couldn't just shut
yeah,
down the Barbican in London, could you?
no,
And turn it into a
no.
bar.
You've been listening to the podcast Two Big Egos in a Small Car. Your hosts were Graham Chalmers and Charles Hutchinson. This was a Baltic sub-production.